Welcome everybody to another episode of Bootstrap Solo. I am your host, Pratik Shah, and today we're going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly about running your own practice. This podcast is for those that want to know what it's really like to start, run, and grow a practice. Today's guest is very special. His name is Danny Abir. He runs a 70-person practice out of Los Angeles that handles a myriad of cases, including bullying, sexual assault, personal injury, bad faith insurance, property damage, and more, as we'll hear from today's podcast. He started his practice. He started on his own about 15 years ago, and 7 years in, started his current practice, ACTS, and has been growing strong ever since. Danny, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great. Glad to be here.
No, thank you so much, Danny. You and I have known each other for some time now, and I was really excited to get you on. I've been trying to make this work with your schedule because I've seen you speak at a couple of events, and I thought that the ideas and the discussion points that you had at those talks were very refreshing and very different than a lot of other people. I felt they were raw and real, and that's what we're all about here on Bootstrap Solo. So I'm excited to have you on, and I'm excited to hear about everything you did. But let's start kind of at the beginning. So you have your current practice, ACTS, for about the last 8 years. But 7 years before that, you started your own practice.
Correct. I started my own practice about 15 years ago. I was with my last job where I was an employee. I was with KPMG, which is now a Big Four accounting firm. I was approached by one of my clients, which was a Fortune 100 company, shoe manufacturer, who said, come on board and be in-house. And at the time I was being billed out at $550 an hour. And I told them, how about we do something else? I will go start my own practice. I will charge you half of what you're paying for my time right now, but I'll have my own practice. And they were very happy to do that. So with that, I started my own practice.
That's really exciting. You know, for a lot of people that work at big firms, I've got some friends that work at big firms, and the dream is always to have one of your clients invite you to come work in-house counsel. And it sounds like you were offered the dream and said, hold on, I got a different dream.
Yeah. The idea of going in-house would have meant that I would have to work only on their account. I was doing international tax planning at the time, and it would not have been, it would have been monotonous and the same thing. And doing tax law is not the most exciting thing in the world.
Really?
And I figured that I had a lot more potential than go work for somebody.
That's amazing. How did you come up with the idea to even say that to them? Was this a multi-day conversation? Was that on the spot? How did that come up? How did that happen?
It was something that I sat down and I did the math for myself. I was a finance major before law school. So the way I looked at it is that I had the option of starting my own practice, and the cash flow from what they would pay me, listen, at $275 an hour, it's still a lot of money, especially for somebody who was at the time making, I think about $100,000 a year. So relative to that, it was a lot of money. I was getting about, I think billing about $15,000, $20,000 a month just with them. So, it was a lot of money that was going in my own pocket. And I used that to start doing marketing for myself and start branding myself as someone who did asset protection planning and tax planning and estate planning, which was all related to what I had done before or what I had studied before. So it made it a lot easier to build that practice.
And it's very unique. It's very unique because a lot of the firm owners we've spoken to, a lot of them, when they started their firm, it's right out of practice with no money, no client, working these really tough cases. But it's really different to start off with a Fortune 100 client. Now, obviously, when you were at KPMG, you had tons of resources. You had staff, you had, whatever you needed. You had brief banks, you had all the stuff and, people that you could rely on. How were you able to give a Fortune 100 client the same level of service that you did at your old firm?
That's a good question. Actually, I didn't have that. So what you're talking about in terms of when I was with a Big Four accounting firm, I was the widget, basically. I was the one. I had a secretary, but all the work was being done at the work that had to do with my level was being done at my level, me and myself.
Got it.
I had a partner overseeing the work, but it was pretty much me. And that's the reason they wanted me to go in-house to do that. So it made sense to be able to handle it myself. And to the extent that I need secretarial work or something like that, I would have them use the secretaries at their headquarters to do the work for me. So it made it a lot easier, and they don't
Oh,
have to
that's
pay
awesome.
for anything. It
You know,
was a
that's
very much win-win.
that is a huge win-win, and it's hard to find those with especially a Fortune 100 client who's used to doing things a certain way. You know, a lot of those Fortune 100 clients, they've got shareholders to respond to, and that's part of the reason they hire some of these bigger companies, KPMG, et cetera, because for them to respond to their shareholders, if something goes sideways, they can say, well, we hired one of the top 4 accounting firms, you know, what do you want me to do? It's not my fault. That's all I could do. And they can kind of cover themselves that way. That's them taking a risk, saying we're doing law offices of Danny Abir, and if something goes wrong, you know, that person that made that decision, they took a real chance on you.
So they didn't quite do that, meaning they didn't replace KPMG with Danny
Ah,
Abir. The work that I was doing as a manager on their account, I continued to do on my own. They
got it.
still had KPMG as the accounting firm that did their audit
I
work,
see.
did their tax planning and everything like that. So KPMG would tell them, okay, we're going to do this. They need somebody to help implement it. And I was the one in-house, relatively speaking, who was going to do that. And I spent about 2 to 3 days a week in their headquarters, but it still gave me about 2 days a week that I could do on my own or work on my own, basically.
Got it.
And that's the way I started. It's also a little bit different because most of the folks that you and I know do contingency work. And contingency work, you don't get paid. Even if you start out with something, you don't get paid
Yeah.
for easily, if you're lucky, 9 months,
Yeah.
maybe a little longer. So this was hourly work, which was very different than what you and I are familiar with.
All right, Danny. So you said that, you know, you kind of always had that like business instinct, you know, but you also mentioned you were 10 years into your career as an attorney. So, you know, I know you worked at KPMG. I know you worked at Deloitte. You worked a lot of these big companies. You know, if you did you always feel like you always wanted to go on your own, or did that come up kind of as you started getting closer to the 10-year mark? How did that happen?
I don't think it had anything to do with the 10-year mark as much as it just had to do with when I felt comfortable. Um, but even when the first job I had, which was right out of law school at Deloitte, not out of law school, out of the LLM program, was at Deloitte. At Deloitte, I was looking to get clients for Deloitte and Touche, which is hilarious considering a first year associate
Yeah.
bringing in business. And one of the partners I actually reported to once told me, I've never had anyone at your level bring in business, especially Deloitte and Touche. I mean, they are
Yeah.
the kind of clients that they had. So I had that instinct to begin with, and it's just part of it. And I always felt like this is a firm that I'm a partner in, not necessarily a inky dinky first year associate. So that mindset was there, but the reality was not. It would have taken many, many more years in order to get to any level where I would reap the benefits of that kind of a mindset. So I think that had a lot to do with it as well.
Understood. Understood. Okay. So 10 years in, you step out, you've got this Fortune 100 company, you've got money coming in, you know, and you do the smart thing. You don't go out and buy the Ferrari. I realize that, right? And you don't go out and buy the Rolex and you say, you know, I'm going to reinvest into my business. You reinvest into your business. You're playing the long game. You meet a friend that's doing mass torts and just mass torts or mass torts and personal injury.
Personal injury and mass torts, primarily a mass tort firm, but there were single event personal injury cases as well.
Okay, and that kind of, you know, introduces you to the personal injury world of what's possible, what's out there, what makes sense, what doesn't. Now, you know, the reality of the situation is, and maybe you felt this too, or you saw this when you work at these big firms and you kind of are in that space, there is a stigma with personal injury.
Yes.
Did you ever hear that or feel that from your colleagues in the big firms that, oh, the attorneys that do personal injuries, they're this, they're that, et cetera, et cetera?
100%. I mean, it's something that even in law school, listen, the defense bar and the big corporations always spread that from day one, that personal injury lawyers are ambulance chasers, personal injury lawyers are this and that. And you get that put into your head so much that you never even think about it. The fact that what the reality of it is and why this is being spread the way that you would think, or why everybody thinks that way or is saying these things. And until I actually got into it and realized what the truth is and what the reality is, and that one of the reasons I actually went after doing taxation was because I was going to go as far away from personal injury as possible. And it's funny that I ended up doing personal injury work years later.
Right. And so, my thought is you must have either kept an open mind or your friend must have really brought a great creative argument to you, because if this has been fed into your mind, and happened to me too, stay away from personal injury. Personal injury is shady. It's this, it's that. And your friend says, hey, come look at my personal injury practice. Your initial instinct must have been, no, man, I'm not. I got an L11 taxation. I'm not doing personal injury.
I actually have an L11 international law as well. So
it
was basically as far away from what
yeah.
I had initially thought to begin with. But it didn't start like that. He first said that you're very good at marketing. So why don't you get, back then they had just started doing Paxil, no, not Paxil, Vioxx. And he said, we're suing Merck for Vioxx for the injuries that it's causing and the heart attacks. Why don't you get me Vioxx cases, since you're so good at marketing, and I'll give you a percentage back. And I'm like, okay. So I got 120 Vioxx clients once I started doing that. And then he said, okay, why don't we do Paxil together? So I did Paxil. And then after that, I said, why don't you come work out of my office? So the clients that you're bringing in feel like you're part of the firm and you can manage the firm and I won't charge you rent. I'm like, okay. So it just evolved into, why don't you now manage the firm and I will handle the litigation. And again, it's really interesting, because once you realize this side of it coming from the other side, there's a lot that you can bring to the table, understanding the business side of things when it comes to running a contingency practice. And I think that's what I brought with me from the other side of the highlights, basically.
So, you join this firm. Well, you don't really join them. You're running your own practice, but you're running it out of their office. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And so it's still law offices of Danny Abir.
Correct.
And you're now inside of this person's office. And how long were you like kind of outside and then joined them? Like how many?
6 months.
6 months on
About
your
6
own,
months.
join their company about 6 months, or run your office out of their office for, after about 6 months. And then how long were you in that firm?
Altogether about 4.5 years.
Wow. So that relationship lasted a while.
Yes, it did.
And was it just the same thing on repeat? You would run the marketing, you would bring in the cases, you'd hand them off to them, you do it on the next one, etc.
No, when I joined him, I think it was him with 4 lawyers, if I'm not mistaken, and other 4 or 5 staff. Built that to 100-person practice in downtown. And that's when, at that point, when I left and started consulting, actually, funny enough.
And so you really got to see how a firm can grow and kind of what it needs, what the pitfalls are, what the positives are, what the negatives are, and how to kind of work around all that stuff. I mean, what a learning experience, right?
The learning experience was incredible. And the other thing is I also learned exactly what you said, the pitfalls, all the things to stay away from, because I didn't have as much control in that environment. Even though I was recruited as a partner, I wasn't a partner in that capacity where I can make as many decisions as I would have liked or do things the way I wanted to. So but I did learn a lot about what not to do, as much as I learned about what to do. And I think that became very important.
And this podcast is all about kind of learning what not to do. And I think that's important to hear. So I want to dig into that. Can you give me maybe the top 3 things you learned what not to do during that time period?
Do not borrow at very high interest rates. That is just number 1. Number 2, number 3, stay away from, and don't overspend. One of the things that it's interesting because I came from the world where finance and percentages and everything is really important. So when these lines of credit at 20% interest, they use for basically mass torts, my first inclination was, okay, this doesn't make any sense because you're paying 20% interest, and for all intents and purposes, you have a equity partner because the interest rates are so high. And his response to me was, no, you don't understand this business. You will make so much money that this becomes nothing. And I kept fighting it for a while. And then I realized that I can't, my say doesn't change anything. So went along with it, but I was right. The 20% interest, 25% interest, it's ridiculously backbreaking, especially when if it's your firm and you use that 25% interest to satisfy your lifestyle, which is not how you want any business loan that you get. You want to use your loans or use loans for your cases and for your kids' cost and for your firm, not necessarily to pay for yourself a high salary. And that's the other aspect that I would highly, highly, highly tell people to stay away from. You should always have a line of credit if you're running a contingency practice. But regardless of whether that line of credit is high interest, low interest, or even no interest, you want to use that line of credit for your firm, not to satisfy a lifestyle, or not like what you said, go buy yourself a Ferrari or buy yourself a Rolex watch. That's not what it's for.
Yeah, and it's easy to get caught up. I mean, we see it all the time. We see it year in and year out. And you've been in the industry a long time. You've seen it more than I have. We've seen a lot of people have a little success in the beginning. They establish a certain lifestyle, and then they got to maintain that because they feel like they don't want to look to the outside world that they've taken a step backwards.
Yeah, that's the outside world themselves. I mean, it's hard. The other thing is, particularly trial lawyers have to have a certain level of ego in order to be successful in law school, in the courtroom. You have to have a certain amount of ego in order to be successful in the courtroom. So it's just like a closer in baseball or a kicker in football, that if you miss the game-winning kick, you have to come back the next game and kick again. Or if you take the loss in a baseball game and you come back the next game and you have to close out again. The trial lawyer has to do the same thing. If they lose a trial, they have to come back and win the next day. And they have to think that they're going to be able to do that day in and day out in every case. That ego comes with a certain amount of certainty that you feel like you have in all of your cases. So you think you're going to hit home runs on every single one of them. Reality is very far away from that, with the exception of a few. And even those few still take losses. So what you have to do is you have to spend. You can't spend on the come. You can't start spending your lifestyle on something that hasn't happened. And that's the one thing that I think a lot of people lose track of, is exactly what you just said. You have success in the beginning and you say to yourself, I'm going to do this again and again. And I'm sure it's going to come. And what are you going to do when that year you have a bad year, or even cases that you thought you were going to hit home runs on? You may hit home runs, but it just gets pushed back.
Yeah.
With mass torts, that's very easily happens, because you have a settlement today and you still may not get paid for another 3 years, because you have to go through so much paperwork and try to get people to opt in. And then once they opt in, you have to resolve so many liens. And it takes a long time for you to finally get paid. And that's basically a time period that you have to try to figure out how you're going to make your ends meet.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Running a contingency practice, like running a plaintiff's practice, like a defense firm, is the biggest kiss of death you can do, because there's a reason why defense firms spend the kind of money they do. There's a reason why defense firms, or the big law, has a first-year associate being paid $270,000 as a first-year associate who doesn't know anything about anything. That's because they're making money on that first-year associate's time. We don't have that luxury, so we can't spend that way, and that's something else that we need to stay aware of.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. I mean, I think the financial management side of the practice is so foreign to so many people. Like you said, that's a business instinctual thing that you've had. And with your educational background, that came kind of not naturally to you, but that's where your education lies. And so, other than the stay away from these predatory lending practices, don't overspend. It seems like all of the advice you were giving of the top 3 things to not to do are financial related.
100%. It's funny. When I started consulting for a while before we started Acts, I was trying to figure out why so many lawyers are very poor at running a business. And the answer I came up with is that most lawyers have some sort of liberal art background, whether it's history, English, poli-sci, and then they go to law school. So in undergrad, there's no business thought. There's no business thought, or it's not something that you've learned anything about management of a business. Then you go to law school. In law school, they barely teach you how to be a lawyer, let alone run the law firm. So you don't get it there. Then you get out of law school and you have one of two choices. You either go start your own practice or you go work for somebody. If you're working for somebody, you're not running a business. So you're not learning running of a law firm from somebody else or running a business from somebody else. You're just an employee who's basically doing what you're told to do or what you're supposed to do. If you go start your own practice at that point, you've started a practice without any kind of a business teaching or learning or anything that has to do with business in all the years that was before you starting your own practice. That's what's missing. That's what most people, unless they have parents that are in some sort of a business, unless they have it by instinct, unless they have it by, like my partner Boris, he had a textile business before he started going to law school. And the reason he went to law school, funny enough, is because he was being billed so much by his lawyers. He wanted to understand what it is that he's being billed for. So he started going to law school at night. And only after he sold the business and had a non-compete, he started practicing law. That is different because he's someone who actually ran a business. He understands financial statements. He actually, funny enough, understands financial statements better than I do.
Wow.
And that is something that you don't learn in law school. And when you're taking history or we're taking poli-sci or English or something like that. So I think that's what the difference is. The one thing that I would say you want to keep in your mind, aside from all the financial stuff, your law firm is a business. The one that you started on your own, or the one you're a partner in, or the one you're an associate in, it doesn't matter. It's a business. And while we are in the business of providing a service, it still needs to be run like a business, not any different than Starbucks, not any different than any other business that needs branding and marketing, that needs an HR function, that needs a financial function, that knowing what's coming in, what's going out, have expectations of cash flow, have an idea of what your exit plan is. You're not just starting a law firm that you're going to keep for a couple of years, assuming that this is going to be a long term. What are you going to do 20 years down the line when you want to retire? And all of that are things that you would do with any other business, and there's no reason not to do it with your law firm.
Understood. Now, for those of us, for the rest of us who don't have that business background, who have never run a textile business, any of those things, are there books or seminars or anything like that that you would suggest that you think that give a good background?
There are a lot of books out there now. Funny enough, when I started doing consulting, there weren't books. There weren't people who actually taught this. There weren't seminars on it. Right now, crazy enough, over the past few years, there have been a lot of conferences and a lot of seminars on how to run a law firm, how to do marketing for a law firm, what are the pitfalls. I've actually, like you said, I've spoken on a few panels about this. So now there's a lot more at it. Our good friend Reza Turkzadeh has a book called The Lawyer as a CEO. When I read it, I'm like, I could have written this myself too, because we think the same way. I actually went to Reza and I said, this is incredible, because it's like, you're spot on and everything is instinctive. There are things that you can do in order to make yourself better, but most importantly, you have to make sure that you don't get caught up in the success, because there's always success with failure, and you have to strap your belt and make sure that you're ready to be able to handle the downside of it, and just spend on things that you have, not things that you don't have.
Yeah, and there is a key to that, and a lot of that is, you know, I see this a lot. Maybe it's being self-aware, or maybe it's controlling your own ego, or maybe it's just having a stable emotional reaction to both good and bad, because you see it both ways. You see people that have a bad day or a bad week or a bad month, and they shut down shop, when if they had just powered through, they might have been okay. And you see it on the other end, where you see people that have a great week, a great month, and a great year, and then they get into financial ruin because, like you said, they assume it's going to keep happening. So how do you maintain that emotional kind of level-headedness, I think is the right word, to kind of ride the positives and ride the negatives through?
I think you always have to be conscious of it, and it's a conscious thinking that this is the reality, and always be cognizant of the fact that what goes up can come
Mhm.
down at least. One of the ways that we grew Acts was through acquisition, and one of the firms that we took over management of, somebody came and told me there's this trial lawyer who's very, very good at what he does. However, he just filed for personal and firm bankruptcy after having a mid 8-figure verdict.
Wow.
And I'm like, how in the world is that
Yeah,
possible?
yeah.
Right? But he was in bankruptcy. His creditors were after him. The bank was after him because just like he had an mid 8-figure verdict, he had blown something like 10, $12 million on a case that he thought is worth over $100 million.
Wow.
And that's the flip side of it. So unless you're able to manage that, unless you're able to be conscious of the fact that some cases are good, some cases are bad, and even the cases that you think are really, really great may not pan out the way you think, but you don't have to risk it. Just spend what you need to spend on those cases and manage it correctly in order to get there. The other thing is, when you look at somebody who had a mid 8-figure verdict, should not be handling trials in the 5 figures.
Mm-hmm.
I always say, you don't a Ferrari on a cobblestone
Mm-hmm.
road. Somebody who's able to get that kind of a verdict should no longer be working on a 5-figure
Mm-hmm.
case. And that's the other thing that he was doing. He came to me after we took over asking for $30,000 on to go handle a trial that his maximum upside, according to him, the best result would have been an $80,000
Yeah.
home. And I'm like, you're going to spend $30,000 to get
Right.
$80,000. What's the client going to end up with? Oh, I was going to discount our fees. Why are you in there to begin
Yeah.
with? So those are the kind of things that we need to be conscious of. Again, if you're running a business, if you're running a widget business, if you're selling newspapers, and one of the things I heard that I loved was John Morgan say that when he interviews people, he's always looking for someone who was a paper boy or a paper girl when they were a kid. And he explained the reason is because they understand business, they understand hustle, and they understand trying to make it. That's what you have to think about. The lemonade game when you were a kid, or the paper route that you used to run when you were a kid. Those are the kind of things that you have to think about. Your law firm is not any different.
Yeah. Yeah. So you start Act, you have your own firm for about 7 years, and then at some point, you decide to start the firm Axe, and that's Abir, Cohen, Trezon, and Salo, right? How
Correct.
did you make that decision? I mean, it sounds like your firm was doing great. You had a great kind of money coming in from the mass tort side. You were doing your estate tax planning, all this stuff, and sound like you had a good system going.
No, I stopped. My own firm. A beer law firm stopped in that context
Mm,
about a year into that mass tort firm. Once that mass tort firm came in, I had to dedicate 100% of my time to the mass tort firm.
understood.
So it was no longer my firm. I went and started doing consulting after that, about 5 years into that. And one of my old friends, Alex Cohen, who was running a property damage insurance coverage practice, asked me to come take a look at his practice. At the time, I think he had about 23 cases, active cases, and he had one employee. And the interesting thing was, I said, "How do you get your cases?" He said, "Word of mouth, friends, family, previous clients." And to know Alex is to love Alex. He's one of the most charming, amazing human beings. And I could understand why he was able to get cases without any kind of marketing or branding. And it's also a niche. It's very unique skill set that he has. So he said, "Can you help me grow this?" I said, "I can do this with my eyes closed. It's not PI. It's not employment. All I have to do is spread the gospel that if you have damage to a property, commercial or residential, Alex Cohen is the person you want to call because he really knows how to handle a case from A to Z." And within, I think, 9 months, we turned his 23 cases into 75.
Wow.
And then he wanted to grow some more. So I'm like, okay, now I have to hire for you. So we hired an employee or two. And at 90, he said, when he said he wants to grow some more, I said, "Okay, now you need infrastructure. Now you're getting to a point where you need the lit department." And I spoke to Boris Trezana and Renata Salo at the time. I explained to them my vision as to what I'm thinking we could do with Alex's practice. And they both bought into it and they saw the potential. So the four of us became partners. And to his credit, Boris, in a matter of a year, got himself up to speed to the point that by the end of the year, before the end of the year, he was handling insurance bad faith trials. Wow. And successfully. It actually, what we did year one was almost 6 times what Alex had done in his last year.
Wow.
And then we doubled that and doubled that, doubled that. And year to date, 8 years later, 2022 year to date, we've had over 155 million in settlements and verdicts so far.
Wow, that's amazing. And you've been growing the business. I mean, we mentioned at the top of the show that you're up to 70 people. And a lot of that, as you mentioned, was, your growth of finding good people has been through acquisition. People that are either running their firm, maybe they don't have the business knowledge, maybe they started their firm and they realize, this isn't what I thought it was. It's not for me. And, you've given them a good home. I have several friends that work for you and have worked for you and all say positive things. But what do you think is the hardest part about building a business to that kind of size?
Signing checks. They say one of the most stressful things in business is signing checks. I sign dozens daily.
Yeah.
So it is stressful. Listen, I think for me, it actually comes very naturally, and I'll tell you what my ideology is with regards to that. That is not difficult. I think if you do what you love to do and you're good at, and just do that, nothing else. First, there's that old adage that you'll never work for the rest of your life. But assume you do something you love to do day in and day out and nothing else, you'll become better and better and better at it. And kind of like Groundhog's Day, if you remember the movie, he wanted to learn how to play the piano. Day one, he's like going like this.
Yeah.
And day 2, day 3, by the end of the movie, he was a concert pianist because he was doing that every day until he got the hang of it. Same thing goes with us. If you're the trial lawyer in the firm and all you do is try cases, if you're a good law motions person and all you do is law motions, if you're good at technology and all you deal with is technology and all you deal is marketing and so on and so forth, you become better and better at it and you're very happy at your job. So what you're doing is something that you love to do and you become very good at it. And I think that creates success. The other part of it is, again, to me, it's not something, I don't find difficulty in it. So I can't tell you what is the most difficult part of it other than the stress that you are responsible for 70 families. That is something that I take home with me. But doing something, right? We're doing it without the need to use a line of credit in order to do that. I do have a line of credit with Esquire Bank. The interest rate is very manageable. but much to their chagrin, I don't use it as often
Yeah.
as I would like.
Yeah, it's one of those
So
things that you want to have it because you just never know, right? We touched on a couple of things, and even when I was running my own firm with Arthur, as we grew the practice, we got to a point where we felt comfortable investing, what we felt were significant sums into our cases, nothing like $10 million or anything like that. But we had already had at the end of the year, at the end of every year, we had an agreed upon amount, which was, we if we need to invest more than, let's say 6 figures into a case, we need to start talking to co-counsel, because you have to invest what's necessary to get the proper result, but you don't want to risk your firm on one case. And that's where the plaintiff's community comes in, where you can easily say, look, I've got, $250,000 into this case. Anything more than that's going to be real trouble for me. Let's figure out a split that works. Whether it's give me money and I want to litigate and I'll give you a percentage back, or whether it's let's work on it together and use resources. But that's an important thing, is a lot of people get a big case and they say, well, I don't want anybody to touch this. I'll just put the money in. I'll borrow, I'll steal, I'll whatever. I'll do whatever I can. I'll beg, borrow, and steal to fund this case myself, because there's going to be a huge payday at the end, and it just doesn't always work out.
you are very unique in your way of thinking and very wise. I'm not just
Thank
saying
you.
that because you're my
Yeah.
friend. It's I call it penny wise and
Yeah.
pound foolish. I prefer joint ventures and co-counseling than taking 100% risk on something. Not that we don't
Right.
do it. There was one case that it was funny enough, a product liability case. I think we were in for $750,000, and we settled it for $4.5 million.
Wow.
But $750,000 is a lot of money to be in for
Yeah.
one case. That is something that we have had, and I would prefer not to. I prefer to share the risk and share the
Yeah.
profit, because yes, like you said, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket until you're at a point that, you know what, you can digest even those
Yeah.
losses, or you learn how to avoid those losses if you can, which is also doable.
Yeah.
If you do things right. I mean, in 8 years, I can comfortably count on one hand the number of zeros we've had on
Yeah.
cases. In 8 years,
That's a
that's a
lot.
lot.
Yeah.
That's not a
That's
lot.
not a lot.
That's
Right. Yeah.
5 cases. It's
That's
not
not
a
a lot.
lot.
Yeah.
Considering we handle currently, I think we have probably about 500 cases in the office
Yeah.
altogether. So 5 in a matter of 8 years, ending up at 0 is not a significant
No.
ending.
And so, I have to ask you this question, because we're all about the hard hitting questions here. What was a moment in that 8 years which was your biggest financial hit?
Our biggest financial hit was a $73 million settlement for AAF, which I believe when you talk to Jonathan Farahi, I think he probably
Yeah.
brought it up. That's our biggest hit. Next to that, we've had on product liability cases, we've had one product liability case where we've had over 20 million in settlements so far, and we haven't been able to finish the trial because we started the trial and they wanted to settle. And we also had a single event case that came to us in February of this year with a $4 million offer. We settled the case after rejecting an $11.5 million mediator's proposal. In May, we settled it for $15 million. So there's one thing that most people don't factor in is your ROI, or your return on investment. Getting a case in February, resolving it in 3 months, that's a significant return on your investment and your time. And that both for the client, both for the referring attorney, as well as for the attorney that's handling the case. We got a case that the highest offer was $10,000 or $15,000. We settled it $425,000 in 3 months. That is incredible return for the attorney who referred the case over, because just think about the ROI. I mean, in 3 months, made it 40 times higher. So I think that's the one thing to think about is that's what the success is. Sometimes you work on a case for 2, 3, 4 years and you get a huge result, but you're not factoring in how much time and effort and investment went into getting that result. And that's the part of it that would be missed if I just tell you what was the greatest success.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The opportunity cost is something a lot of people don't think about. But what I really meant to ask is now I'm going to flip that is what were the biggest financial losses that you've had in 8 years the ones you talk about that are on one hands and, hey, you invested X amount of money. What were the hard days?
The two of them, one of them, we got a verdict and we got J and OV on the verdict. We had spent $150,000 on a case and we got an 8.3 or $9.3 million verdict against the city. The judge, J and OV did, and that we lost on the appeal. So that was one. We lost on a case that we tried. This is about 4 years back. We had a trial. We had spent $250,000 on a case, and the injuries were significant TBI. And the jury found they had a theory of liability that even the defense did not put into their head. They just thought that a cat may have or a dog may have crossed the road and caused the accident. Which I have no idea where in the world.
Was there even a mention of a dog in the trial?
No. I mean, I'm telling you, when we pulled the jury and the face, you had to see the defense counsel's face. It was just in shock, but he was happy. But nobody had even brought up a dog, and there was no dog. It was in the middle of a freeway. My
God, that one hurts worse because it's not even like
it does
lost to some logical reason.
You know what it is, but that is the perfect example of the fact that sometimes the best cases do not necessarily end up where you think it would end up because you're putting it in the hands of a jury. One of the things that Boris does not like that I bring up a lot, I tell him I hate verdicts. And he's all like, why do you hate verdicts? I said, verdicts are really for marketing. Because you can hit it. I mean, the fact that you can hit verdicts is a great marketing tool. People would have you try their cases. And the reason I'm not a big fan of verdicts is because from a business's point of view or the client's point of view, you hit these giant verdicts, they don't necessarily get paid on. I spoke to Mike Alder once and I said, what's your... I said, what was your best year? And he gave me a number. And I'm like, this can't be. You've had 8-figure verdicts, many mid 8-figure verdicts. And he said, yeah, but collecting on them is a completely different point of view. That's the thing is you hit a $35 million verdict. You don't necessarily collect a $35 million result. Not all the time, most of the time. This year, one of the other cases, the funny thing was we went to trial, $4,250,000 of insurance. And the night before closing arguments, they offered us $10 million.
Wow.
Boris called me and I said, accept.
Right.
And he said, listen, I'm doing very well. The jury can come back with a lot more money. And I said, accept. Talk to the client. It is better for him to take it. So he was right. He called me the next day and he cursed me and he said the jury would have when we pulled the jury, they would have come up with 25 to 30 million.
Gosh.
Hold on. This is a lesson. We're talking about business, right? So let's talk about business. 4.25 policy limit, which means, first of all, your $30 million verdict would have been appealed. The verdict itself.
Right.
With 1.5 to 2 years for that appeal. Once you succeed, then they're going to challenge you on whether the policy was open. Remember, 4.25 policy, $30 million. Then you're going to have to litigate that side for God knows how long. And then the appeal of that litigation for God knows how long. This client would not have seen a penny of the money for years to come. Here, you got $10 million today. You can start working on getting yourself better today without having to deal with litigation for the next 5 to 8 years. God knows what point you'd say, cry uncle, and say, okay, give me that $10 million. We'll be done with
Right.
this. So that's why I think verdicts are not necessarily what runs your business. It is wise settlements and settlements that you handle at the right time.
Right. And I think, when you really sit down with the biggest names in trial lawyers, you sit down with the biggest names of those guys and gals that have been hitting for big verdicts. I think, in the private conversations, they all agree with you that at the end of the day, you need those verdicts because you have to be able to show the insurance companies that you can get there and that they know that they're taking a risk if they take it to trial. And you need those verdicts for marketing, for when you're getting cases, to say, look, I can do this. I can get it for you. If push comes to shove, I'm there. But of course, all businesses, all law firms, excuse me, not all businesses, all contingency fee law firms have to make their money from settlements, because if every single case, if every time you needed to make payroll, you had to get a verdict, you'd be out of business.
100%.
And, I can't even imagine, I ran a little small practice with Arthur about, I think we were up to 13 people at one point, and we would see that payroll come through every 2 weeks, and it would be like a punch in the gut every 2 weeks. We know it's coming, but you're still like, well, those settlements didn't come in. Why is this payroll got to hit? I can't even imagine what that's like running a 70-person practice.
Yeah, it's a pretty big nut. It really is a big nut.
That's not counting marketing.
That's not counting anything. I mean, remember, 70 people,
Rent.
You need space
Yeah.
for. You have rent, that's one of your biggest spends, and your salaries are the other spend. And just the case costs alone, that in itself is a lot of money that it takes to, you have 350 cases in litigation. You spend an average of $50,000 a case. Just do the math. It is not, it all adds up. And but having the right people around you is really important. Having the right people in your firm is really important. Making people feel like they're working as a family, they have a goal together to hit, is really important. I did something earlier this year that I'm thinking twice about now. I put a bogey and I said, if we hit this marker by the end of the year, we will take everybody and their significant others and their children to Cabo for a trip. That's over 150 people that we have to take to Cabo.
Well, congrats
we
on
hit
hitting the number.
Thank you. We're taking them. We're taking them. But I mean, you had to see people, the way people responded to it throughout the year. We use Slack as a form of communication. Whenever there's a settlement, there's a flag of Mexico underneath the settlement that people put, saying they're looking forward to it, and they're counting it, and they're looking at it, and that, I think that's a significant showing of how people work together. And somebody just said to me, teamwork is dream work today. And it is true.
Yeah.
If you work as a team, you'll accomplish a lot. So my role is to make sure that they don't have to worry about their paychecks. They don't have to worry about case costs. They don't have to worry about being able to pay the experts and so forth. And to try to bring in the kind of people who are like-minded and can help to the success of the firm.
Yeah.
Their job is to make sure that they just do what they're here to do. And I think it helps to be able to like and enjoy who you work with.
I love that. I mean, I think that's a great place for us to kind of start wrapping this up. And one of the questions I always like to ask people is, if you could go back in time and talk to the young Danny Abir, what would you tell him?
That is so funny. I wish I could show you the goosebumps I just got from this question. A while back, about 3 years ago, I fell asleep on the beach in Hawaii. And I dreamt that I went back to my second year of law school, and I woke up on the beach in Spain. And it was a total back to the future moment. And I started talking to myself, telling myself that you're going to buy Netflix stock trust me, you're going to love this. You don't know what Netflix is, but you're going to buy the stock. And I started telling myself, do this, don't do this, don't do that. And then at the end of it, I realized for a second, what am I going to do if I don't get to my wife and kids? And the shock of it woke me up. And I looked around and there they were. And I said to myself, I'm never again going to say, I wish I could have done something different. And I don't. There isn't one day that I live my life and I go back and say I would have done something different. Everything we do in building our practices lead us to that. So I have nothing that I would go back to change. But the one thing that I would say to anybody listening to this who's trying to start your own practices and build it, you have to look at yourself and see what it is that you want to do and what you enjoy doing, and do that. Because building your practice means you have to do every single thing yourself, meaning you're the managing partner, you're the accountant, you're the marketing person, you're the lawyer, that's how you start at least, right? And until you build something, you're going to have to do all of that and then some. And then you have to bring in people. But you have to figure out what it is that you love to do. And for example, if you just want to be a trial lawyer and you don't want to deal with anything else, just find a home with a place that would appreciate you, appreciate your skill, and help you do what you got to do. And sometimes that's better than starting your own practice.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way to say it. I think that starting your own practice or running your own business is not the right solution for everybody, because it's all about what is right for you as an individual. And it's not a negative. There's a lot of people that go on there and they say, oh, I'll never work for anybody. And it's like, don't look down on people that work for other people. They're happy there. Whatever you're happy with is what you should do. And it doesn't matter how anybody else sees it. I think that is a wonderful place to end and a wonderful message to put out there. Danny, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day, of running a 70% practice to talk to me. I appreciate you very much. You've been supportive. You've been a big supporter of mine. You've been a big supporter of Esquire Tech. And so I'm very, very grateful to you. And with that, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching Bootstrap Solo. And just remember that just because guys like Danny Abir make it look easy, it doesn't mean that it is. So thank you very much. And for all of you that enjoyed this and got some value out of it, please do me a favor and share this and spread the gospel of Danny and have everybody listen to what he had to say. Thank you very much.